extra permissions, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, does this work?
Yep, looks good.
Good. All right, then goes back and forth. Good.
Yeah, I can quickly try. Prabhanjan, are you giving the talk on your paper?
Ramadan is distracted.
Oh, okay. Can my slides, or are they visible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, it works.
Okay, great. All right. Shall I just start sharing now?
Might as well, I suppose, since
Okay.
yours will be the first one. Oh, although tell me a bit, is this meeting being broadcast yet?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Hmm.
How do you change this virtual background?
Oh, you have to click on video, and then there's this arrow next to the video button.
Video. Oh, choose virtual background. Okay, cool.
And then you have to add it with the plus.
Oh, Alex, can you unshare your screen for a moment?
Okay.
I'll just quickly check my slides.
Yep. Yeah, of course.
This one. Can you see my screen by any chance?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next session will commence in 3 minutes. So please kindly take your seats for the audience on site, and please get ready for the audience online. And I think our session chair and our speakers are ready, and they're just testing their slides, I know. We're just gonna wait for another 3 minutes to start. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to QCrypt 2022. I'm your MC today. My name is Rebecca, and we're going to have the theory talks for this session. I can see our speakers are all ready now. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome our session chair, Ernest Dan.
Hello, everyone. So welcome to this session. So the format, as with the previous sessions, there will be 6 minutes for a brief presentation from the speaker and 4 minutes for question and answer. So that's pretty brief. So if you have a question, you should ask it quickly before we run out of time. And today's session will last for, this session will last for 1 hour. And there's a lot of speakers. So let's keep things moving so that everything stays on time. And without further ado, let's start with our first speaker, who is Alexander Poremba, and we'll be presenting proofs of deletion for the based on learning with errors. Yeah.
Thank you, Ernest. Can everyone hear me okay and see my slides?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about quantum proofs of deletion for learning with errors. And a recent exciting idea in quantum crypto is this idea of certified deletion. So here, imagine that there are two parties, Alice and Bob, and what certified deletion allows you to do is, say Bob receives a quantum ciphertext from Alice, and what he can do is he can prove to Alice that he deleted the ciphertext. And in that case, he produces some classical certificate pi, and Alice can verify if pi is a valid certificate. And if that's the case, then Alice might as well leak the secret key at this point, and Bob still cannot tell which message was encrypted. And this idea is due to Broadbent and Islam, who gave the first private key encryption scheme. Later, Hiroka et al. Gave a public key encryption scheme and an attribute-based encryption scheme with certified deletion. And both schemes have the same idea that's kind of underlying the construction, which is a hybrid approach. So there's a quantum part and a classical part. And the quantum part is the important one because obviously you need quantum to do this because classically it's impossible. So you have BB84 states and you have a classical ciphertext that encrypts some private information, for example, the choice of bases of the BB84 state. However, what's missing is functionality, and ideally one would like a fully homomorphic encryption scheme with certified deletion, because here you have a quantum server and a client, and the quantum server wants to compute on private data, and the client wants to learn the outcome of the computation, but at the end of the protocol, the server should have deleted all data and prove it to the client. Unfortunately, hybrid encryption actually isn't enough to construct such an encryption scheme, because as I explained in my paper, it's always possible to homomorphically decouple the classical part from the quantum part, which is a bit unfortunate. So to construct FHE with certified deletion, we really need an all-new approach that's not hybrid encryption. Okay, and so in my paper, I construct kind of the first encryption scheme with certified deletion that doesn't follow the hybrid paradigm, and I'm using the learning with errors assumption here. So here's the main idea behind my construction. So my construction or my encoding is loosely inspired by the quantum reduction from SIS to LWE. And here the idea is we take a Gaussian superposition over vectors x, and then we have a second register where we compute a times x, okay? And then we measure the second register, which will collapse the register to some outcome y, and then we get the state that's on the left-hand side, which I call the dual Gaussian state. And the dual Gaussian state is just a Gaussian superposition over short vectors such that ax equals y. And the nice thing about this state is that if you take the Fourier transform, you get another Gaussian state, which I call the primal state. And here you just have a superposition of random LWE samples, okay, with a phase. So now it's kind of immediate how this is going to work, because in the primal domain we have LWE, so we can encode the ciphertext there. And then if we want to delete, we apply the Fourier transform and output a short pre-image that anyone can check. Okay, so certified deletion will use the dual domain where we measure and get one of those pre-images. And this is actually the inhomogeneous SIS problem. So it should be computationally difficult to get such a pre-image unless you actually measure the state. So that's the whole idea. And now I'm going to show you how you can bootstrap this to an encryption scheme. So this is the dual regF public key encryption scheme with certified deletion. So the idea is the ciphertext is a primal Gaussian state that's shifted, and the secret key is a short trapdoor vector in the kernel of the matrix A. So using this trapdoor, you can decrypt, and you have a ciphertext that's just a primal Gaussian state. Okay, so how does deletion work? So as I just explained, you apply the Fourier transform, and now you get the following state, which is a superposition of short solutions to ax equals y. And there's a phase, right? And the phase contains the plaintext information, or the ciphertext information, if you like. So if you measure it, so in order to prove deletion, you have to measure it, right? You have to show that you have a pre-image. So you have to measure it, but if you measure it, you kind of destroy the information in the phase, so therefore the plaintext is now gone once and for all. Okay, and one cool thing about this construction is that verification of a deletion certificate is public, right? Because I can just hand out A and Y, and anyone can verify whether someone found a short solution pi such that A times pi equals Y. Okay, and to get FHE, we don't actually have to do much more work, because once we have dual regF, we can just use the dual GSW scheme, which is a very similar scheme, except we have to use bit decomposition to allow for NAND gates homomorphically, but in principle, it's the same construction. And so what this final scheme allows us to do is to compute unencrypted data and to simultaneously prove deletion to a client. Okay? And for security, I'm arguing the following. So I'm proving the security of all my constructions under the following conjecture, which I call strong Gaussian collapsing. Okay, and this is a special case of collapsing hash functions that have a bit of a leakage in it. So here's how it works. So Gaussian collapsing basically means that it's computationally difficult to distinguish a superposition of preimages from a single measured preimage. And so here's how the security experiment works. The adversary gets one of the two states, generates some kind of preimage, so we don't care how the adversary came up with it. But once the adversary presents us with a preimage and it's valid, it's a short ISIS solution, we may as well hand out a trapdoor. And once we hand out the trapdoor, the adversary should guess whether the state at the beginning of the experiment is a quantum superposition or not. And here it's crucial that the trapdoor is only revealed after the adversary generates a preimage, because if we handed out the trapdoor at the beginning of the experiment, the adversary could easily distinguish the states. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't know how to prove this under standard assumptions, but it's a plausible hardness assumption, and I give some reasons why I think it's hard, and I give an entropic uncertainty relation that kind of helps quantify the difficulty at cheating in this experiment, or at breaking the assumption. Okay, so this brings me to the end of my talk. I just want to highlight two open problems that I find interesting. So the first one is prove the strong Gaussian collapsing conjecture, for example, under LWE or the inhomogeneous SIS problem, or disprove it if that's the case. And the second open problem I want to highlight is to just dequantize the entire FHE protocol with deletion and make it a kind of classical client quantum server type protocol. Okay, that's the end of my talk. If you're interested in the details, feel free to watch the longer version of the talk on YouTube, and I'm happy to take questions.
All right, yeah. So for the online viewers, you can type a question in the chat or raise your hand, and we can unmute you. Or are there any speakers in the live? Any questions from the live attendees?
Any questions for Alexander?
Okay, if not, then given the short time frame, I'll just quickly clarify one thing is that, so this is as usual, like under computational hardness assumption. Do you know if there's some fundamental obstructions to getting an infotheoretic version? Like, for example, the broadband in Islam just certified deletion was infotheoretic.
Yeah, so information theoretic constructions only work, I think, for private key encryption. Everything else we don't know how to do, because yeah, so broadband scheme is very much a QKD type protocol, so there we can do without. But once we get into public key encryption and so on, yeah, I don't know how to do anything under information theoretic assumptions. Yeah, I think it's just too hard, or may even be impossible. Yeah.
Right, and I guess for copy protection, there's some obstructions, like if the scheme is like perfectly complete, right?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yeah, for copy protection, yeah, there have been some papers, like the secure software leasing without assumptions paper has some like great theorems that kind of limit what you can hope to build using computational or information theoretic assumptions. Yeah.
All right, and okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for your questions.
Okay, and now our next speaker will be Tony. Yeah, so Tony Mecker will be giving the next talk, and for this one, it will be on the remote state preparation.
All right, yeah, one sec. All right, can you see the screen and hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So yeah, thanks, Ernest. So let me just turn on the laser pointer. Okay, yes, thanks. So this is joint work with Alexander Georgiou and Alexander Poremba, who just heard speak. And what this is about is a kind of way of removing quantum communication from quantum crypto protocols. So I'll present this as a kind of transformation that we can do on quantum crypto protocols from something I'll call the original protocol to a sort of dequantized version of that protocol. And this transformation is going to be quite generic, but we do need the original protocol to have like some structure. So what is that structure? It's a two-party protocol with Alice and Bob. And the protocol must start with Alice just sending random BB84 states to Bob. So these are the 4 BB84 states. Alice sends over n of them. And we can also write these like this. So this theta I here is like the basis of the BB84 state. And the VI is the value. And just intuitively, why is this useful? Basically, it's useful because Alice now knows these theta I and VI, but Bob doesn't, right? He just receives these states without knowing what these values are. And then this asymmetry of knowledge is then what's usually exploited in the later protocol. And we don't really care for this transformation, what the rest of the protocol is, as long as it's just purely classical communication. Okay, so we can divide this protocol up into a quantum part, which would be Alice sending these quantum states, and then also Bob may have to do quantum operations throughout in order to be able to succeed with efficient operations. And then this part is purely classical. And the dequantized protocol that we want to get from this should look something like this, where now we've replaced this first step of sending the BB84 states by some other classical interactive protocol, and just copied over this second phase of the original protocol to here. And of course, we want that this dequantized protocol achieves pretty much the same security guarantees as the original one. Okay, so this classical protocol here is something that we call a protocol for parallel remote state preparation. And constructing this is really like the main technical contribution here. This protocol is really designed to emulate the sending of the BB84 states as closely as possible. So it also has this property that, at the end of this interaction, Alice has some values theta I and VI, and Bob is able to prepare the corresponding BB84 states without actually knowing what these theta I and VI are. So it's basically a way of having Bob blindly prepare BB84 states without him finding out which BB84 states he prepared. Okay, so let me just very quickly give you some sort of pros and cons of the original and dequantized protocol. Of course, the whole point of this is that we remove the need for Alice to have quantum capabilities, and as a result, we also remove the need for a quantum channel connecting Alice to Bob. So this is all purely classical interaction. What do we pay for it? Firstly, this original protocol here can have information theoretic security. It doesn't have to be, but I haven't specified what exactly is going on down here, but it may have information theoretic security. Whereas this dequantized protocol will always have computational security, so it's secure assuming that LWE is quantumly hard. And the reason for this is that this parallel RSP protocol that we construct relies on sort of post-quantum crypto tricks using ideas from Mahadev's verification protocol and follow-up works. Another thing that we lose is that this original protocol here can have negligible sinus error, meaning that a cheating party only succeeds with negligible probability, whereas this dequantized protocol will always have at least inverse polynomial sinus error because this parallel RSP protocol already has that sinus error. And finally, while we make Alice's life easier, making her fully classical, we may make Bob's life somewhat harder and require him to have more quantum capabilities. So I just want to stress that there's not some way of making protocols more useful for like near-term devices or something. Really, our motivation here is to try and understand in as generic a way as possible which quantum crypto primitives can be implemented with purely classical communication, so long as you're willing to accept a computational assumption. So that's why we care about this transformation being as generic as possible and don't care as much about the actual parameters and how practical it actually is. Okay, so let me end just on some examples of protocols we might apply this to. So the most famous protocol that works in this structure is BB84 quantum key distribution. And we can apply our dequantization transformation to this, but then what do we get out? We get out a protocol for distributing classical keys based on the hardness of LWE, right? But if that's your goal, you should just do public key crypto based on LWE. So this is really a sort of non-example or an example of a protocol where you shouldn't apply this transformation, because what you get out is just a kind of worse and more complicated version of a classical crypto primitive. On the other hand, these primitives down here, I won't explain what exactly they do, but they are kind of quantum crypto primitives that have no real analog in a purely classical world. So as a result, if we dequantize these, we also, lose something. We lose, again, information theoretic security, just like we did for quantum key distribution up here. But what we get out is still something that, you couldn't have achieved with only classical crypto, and that really relies on Bob being quantum even in this dequantized protocol, so this protocol with classical communication. So the general rule here is that this transformation is sort of useful or interesting for protocols that achieve primitives which are impossible in purely classical crypto, but it doesn't yield anything interesting if there's already a corresponding classical crypto primitive, and all you gain from introducing quantum in this original setting was boosting it information theoretic security, because this is lost in this transformation. Right, so I'll stop here. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. And are there any questions from the audience? So nothing in the online so far as I can see.
Oh, we have a question here on.
Okay.
Just a rather basic question. So the parallel remote state preparation can be applied to any family of states? There's
no. So it's really quite specific to these BB84 states. So yeah, I mean, I said, the protocol here starts with sending n BB84 states in parallel, and these are precisely the states to which we can do parallel remote state preparation. Now it is possible.
I wanted to do it for.
Sorry, go ahead.
You need.
Did we lose audio?
Oh no! I just stopped.
Okay.
Because...
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So it is possible to extend this remote state preparation protocol beyond just BB84 states to sort of some additional states, which are, if you imagine like the blocks here, it's like the vertical ones, and then there's like 8 in the horizontal plane, so you get like a total of 10 states. There's a paper by Georgi and Vidic on single qubit RSP that does this. That extension is technically like slightly awkward because it relies on quantum random access codes. But in any case, it's still then limited to, like a slightly extended set of states. But we currently don't know how to do this for more generic states.
Oh, okay. I mean, like BB84 states come from some unbiased basis. So I was also wondering whether if you have like higher dimensional mutually unbiased basis, maybe there's some natural extension to that.
Yeah, so that may well be possible. I'm not sure. So roughly speaking, the reason why BB84 states are natural in this context is that the way you get these is you have like 2 sort of indistinguishable families of functions, and one family of functions leads to like computational basis states, and one family of functions leads to Ramat basis states. So if you want like higher dimensional analogs of this, you have to sort of extend these families of functions, which may be possible, but may also be somewhat annoying to do. So I'm not sure. I expect that it would be possible, but potentially technically quite challenging to implement.
I mean, I'm a bit rusty on this, but preparing 2 like BB84 style states in parallel is not an MUB in higher dimensions, is it? Rusty would have to double check.
I was thinking of like doing, do everything of like FQ and so on, which doesn't sound
like if the Q is 2 to the N, I kind of forgot whether it matches.
Yeah, that's such a case. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, but yeah, okay, I guess for the time being, we can wrap this up, and if there's further discussion, can be done during the discussion session. I think I might have
Yes.
missed someone who raised your hand in the participants just now, but sorry, you'll have to, I think, take the discussion to later as well. And in the meantime, Tony will give a second talk as well, this time on the entropy accumulation theorem.
Yeah, give me 1 second to switch slides. Let's see. All right, that's looking good. All right, can you see the slides?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, shall I just go ahead, Ernest, or do you want to say anything?
Yeah, so yes, you can go ahead and present the
okay,
generalized entropy accumulation and its applications.
All right, yeah, so, okay, this is joint work with Omar Fazli, David Zutter, and Renato Renna. And as Ernest said, it's about generalized entropy accumulation, which is a kind of new proof technique for proving security of quantum crypto protocols. So in this short talk, I'll mostly focus on prepare and measure QKD as an example of a quantum crypto protocol. I want to stress it's not the only quantum crypto protocol to which this technique can be applied, but it's a sort of useful example. So just as a brief reminder, what does a prepare and measure QKD protocol look like? We have Alice and Bob. They want to generate a shared key, and they can do so using some authenticated classical channel and an insecure quantum channel. So some eavesdropper Eve may sort of intercept any quantum message and tamper with it. Now, there are two widely considered security notions in QKD. One is called security against general attacks, which says roughly that the key is secure no matter what Eve does. And it also takes into account the fact that Alice and Bob will only execute some finite number of rounds. This is really what you need to prove if you want to use a protocol in practice, right? You have to prove that the key that you get is secure no matter what happens. Unfortunately, this can be quite hard. The intuition being that, if you consider every attack that Eve could possibly do, you have to also consider very complicated, correlated, or entangled attacks across different rounds. So a much easier task is to prove security against something called collective attacks, where it's assumed that Eve behaves in an IID manner. So this means she picks some single round attack and she just executes this attack independently in each round. Now this is of course a completely unrealistic assumption, so proving this by itself is useless for practical purposes, but it is much easier, so it's got that going for it. And the main reason to care about these collective attack security proofs is that for many cases, they can be kind of converted into security proofs against general attacks. So there are sort of general techniques for showing that under some extra conditions, security against collective attacks implies security against general attacks. And this is called a reduction to IID. And this generalized ETH that I'm talking about here is a kind of new tool for doing these reductions to IID. So the main advantage of the generalized ETH is that it's very broadly applicable, and in particular, very generically applicable to prepare and measure QKD. So for example, if we apply it to this scenario, then we get this very general kind of theorem, which says that any QKD protocol that can be expressed as an instance of some particular but very generic template form that is secure against collective attacks, so some key rate KCA, is also secure against general attacks with a finite size key rate, which is just the collective attack key rate minus something which scales as 1 over the square root of the number of rounds that Alice and Bob execute. Okay, so this second order term here is basically some sort of something that you lose for allowing general attacks and finite size effects over just the collective attack scenario. Okay, so this is a kind of quite useful theorem for practical purposes, because it gives you a recipe for proving security of QKD. You take your protocol, you first prove sort of collective attack bands using these general numerical techniques, and then you can just run it through this theorem and you, without any extra work, get out key rates against general attacks in the finite size regime. So this was specific to prepare and measure QKD. Now let me just sort of compare existing techniques for doing these reductions to IID in quantum crypto more generally. So I put the generalized ETH that I'm talking about here on the right, and then we have the quantum definity theorem, which is sort of the original technique for doing these reductions to IID. and the original entropy accumulation theorem, of which this is a generalization. So the quantum definite theorem is applicable to very generic symmetric protocols, including the kind of prepare and measure QKD protocols I had on the previous slide. And this is sort of an advantage because the symmetry assumption here is quite weak. You can usually symmetrize protocols. So this is quite broadly applicable. The downside is that the bounds that you get, so these second order corrections that I had on the previous slide, they depend on the dimension of the quantum system that Alice sends over to Bob. And this is obviously bad, right? Because it means that you get good results for simple low-dimensional QKD protocols like BB84. But if you have high-dimensional QKD protocols where the underlying quantum system has some high dimension, then you get really quite poor bounds. And if you want to move to a device-independent scenario, then it's entirely useless because there you have no control over the dimension. Now, an entropy accumulation kind of range of protocols you can apply it to is somewhat narrow. You can only apply it to so-called entanglement-based protocols, and in particular, not to prepare and measure protocols that I described on the previous slide. And this is a downside because these prepare and measure protocols, they are the practical ones. These entanglement-based protocols, we like them as theoreticians, but they're usually not as practical. But on the other hand, the bounds that you get from the entropy accumulation theorem are independent of the dimension of the quantum system. So as a result, this is good for entanglement-based device-dependent as well as device-independent protocols, but it's generally difficult or even impossible to apply to prepare and measure protocols. Now, this generalized EAT is applicable to general sort of sequential protocols, by which I mean that the protocol really goes in a strongly sequential manner where, say in QKD, Alice would only start the next round after Bob has received the quantum state from the previous round. But beyond this, there are very, very few extra assumptions on the kind of protocol that this is applicable to. And in particular, this includes very generic prepare and measure protocols. And the bounds that we get are also, they're pretty much the same as for the EAT, so they're also independent of the dimension of the quantum system. So as a result, the generalized EAT is good for prepare and measure, as well as entanglement-based QKD protocols and device-independent protocols. And it's also applicable to something called mistrustful cryptography, which I won't have time to explain, but it's like a whole class of settings to which these two techniques here can't be applied at all. All right, thanks.
All right, thank you. So just wanted to quickly highlight, there was actually a leftover question from the previous talk. So later, Tony, if you could type in an answer perhaps. But in the meantime, focusing on the entropy accumulation, do we have any questions for Tony?
Yes, we have a question.
I have a quick question, Sharon. So could you go back to the slides where you relate the key rate between the general attack and collective attack?
Yes.
So it would seem from these expressions that if you go into the asymptotic setting, then the key rates would just coincide, right?
Yes, that's correct.
But there's still, this additional assumption of IID in collective attack. So are you not? Why is it that you're not losing anything in this setting?
So yeah, you're right that, and if they do, infinitely many rounds, then basically the key rate for collective attack and general attacks coincides. So I guess morally this tells you that, the correlation that you can have between different rounds doesn't really buy her anything. I guess this may be a somewhat surprising feature, but I mean, it's not something that's sort of specific to the generalized EAT. This is also present in the original EAT and settings to which it can be applied. So this is, yeah, I guess it's nice that you get a first order term which is exactly the same, but it's already that feature is already present in the other existing techniques.
Okay. So
it might maybe be worth highlighting that, okay, this is maybe not true for all possible protocols, like possibly coherent one way, we're still maybe not sure.
Well, I put something in parentheses here, right? That's the fine print that can be expressed in a particular form. So you'll have to express it in that particular form. You can also adapt that form, of course, so that the proof technique is pretty general. But yeah, we're not entirely sure yet whether you can apply it to coherent one way and these differential phase shift protocols and so on.
Okay, and
Okay.
second question. So there's this original EAT protocol and this generalized version of the EAT protocol. So given that the original one is maybe more restricted in its range of applicability, so if you now apply this generalized version to, let's say, a protocol where the original version also applies, is it the case that you actually lose some parameters?
So technically, yes, you do lose like a very, very tiny bit in the second order. So there's like one term which is very slightly different in the second order loss. But that's a kind of tiny loss. So I'd say in general, unless you really, really care about squeezing out like the last, percent of a percent of key rate, you can just apply the generalized EAT sort of in all scenarios and sort of forget about the original EAT for all intents and purposes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the
Okay.
questions.
But yeah, so as it turns out, there's actually quite a few questions in online, but I don't think we have time to cover them now. We'll have to defer it to possibly the break after this talk. And yeah, so in the meantime, yes, moving on to the next speaker, we have Yella Don, who will be describing developments in the random oracle model.
Yes, can you see my slides?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, yes, this is about our work online extractability in the quantum random oracle model, which is a joint work with Sarah Spear, Christian Mayens, and Christian Schaffner. I'll first explain what extraction is and where we find it in cryptography. We use extraction in protocols where some algorithm sends messages that depend on a secret S, and in an honest execution, S indeed remains secret, but there also exists an extractor algorithm that is given some kind of enhanced access to the algorithm. I'll explain about that more in a bit. That allows it to retrieve the secret S. Then there are a couple of different flavors of extractability, namely so-called straight line extraction, where the extractor that is given black box access to the algorithm runs it only once instead of rewinding it, so running it back and forth multiple times. And that's actually the preferred sort of extraction because it usually leads to a better loss factor since we don't have to rely on the algorithm succeeding multiple times. And obviously it also gives a better runtime for the extractor. And then the extraction is called on the fly when it happens during the execution of the algorithm instead of afterward. So in particular, it means that after the extraction has taken place, the algorithm should still be able to continue its run, or phrased differently, an adversary should not be able to notice the extraction. And this is, for example, what we need in proving CCA security of encryption schemes, where the reduction has to simulate the decryption oracle. So for every incoming ciphertext query, we have to somehow extract the corresponding plaintext without using the secret key. And after this extraction has taken place, the adversary should still be able to continue its run and go on to the next query. Well, if we have an extractor that works straight line and on the fly, then we say that the protocol is online extractable. And that's indeed the goal for this work. So about this enhanced access, there are a couple different kinds. I already discussed rewinding, which is often used in proving security of proofs of knowledge or proving the zero knowledge property. For extractable commitments, for example, you often see that an extractor is given some trapdoor information. And then there's the random oracle model, where a protocol that uses some concrete hash function, where we then model this hash function as an idealized random function that the adversary has to query, and then we can give the extractor read and write access to this oracle. So as a form of enhanced access to the adversary. This is used to prove security of hash-based commitments, commit and open protocols, and CCA security. And now the natural question is, can we do something similar in the quantum random oracle model, which is almost exactly like the classical random oracle, except that the adversary is given superposition query access to the oracle, which then causes a lot of the classical proof techniques to break down. But in our paper, we show that yes, it's indeed possible to have online extraction also in the quantum random oracle model. We construct a simulator that has both a random oracle and an extraction interface. And here in this example, I consider an algorithm that outputs a hash-based commitment somewhere in the middle of its run. And the very moment this commitment is put on the table, we can enter it to the extraction interface of our simulator. And it will output a possible input x prime, such that if then later at the end of the run, the adversary outputs an x that is supposed to be the opening to this commitment, we are given the guarantee that either this x equals the x prime that we got from our extraction interface, or h of x, the random oracle applied to x, is not equal to c, which means that this is not a valid opening to the commitment. So in other words, the adversary can then not open the commitment. So either we find what's inside the commitment, or the adversary does not know how to open it himself. That's for this simple example of a hash-based commitment. But our extractor works for any function f that takes as arguments some input x and the oracle applied to x, as long as this function has a special property, namely that for every x and t, there are not too many y's that map that x to that t. So in other words, t kind of binds x. Okay, well, we can apply this, in our paper we apply it, for example, in so-called commit and open protocols. In the full type, I explain what those are, but for now, I just want to tell you that we can give a tight reduction, with a tight online extractability, where we don't need additional properties like collapsingness or unique responses that previous techniques required. And also those techniques incur the cubic loss in the reduction, while we have no loss at all. And these commit and open protocols, they are used in popular MPC in the head paradigm to create identification schemes, such as the one that is used in a post-quantum signature scheme, PICNIC, where there is a caveat that in the current work, we only prove security of the interactive protocol that underlies the signature scheme, where the PICNIC uses a non-interactive version with the Fiat-Shamir transformation, but we actually have a follow-up work where we can also show online extractability of the non-interactive version. And then another...
Sorry to interrupt, but I think we may need to move a little faster and possibly take one quick question after this.
Yes, sorry. So I'll quickly finish then. Second application is the Fujisaki Okamoto transform, yeah, okay, I'll just finish now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, but okay, so yeah, if there's questions from the online audience or anyone from the live audience.
Any questions here?
Okay, if not, then I think I'll just have a very brief. Oh, sorry, Alexander, did you have something?
Yeah, I want to ask a
Okay.
quick question. Thanks for a nice talk. Are you using the compressed oracle model in your paper at all?
Yeah, you mean the compressed oracle technique.
Okay, so that
That's
technique is kind of crucial for the extractability property, or?
Yeah.
okay.
We're actually using a variant of that from a paper by Chung et al.
Okay, very
we're
cool.
also
Okay.
adapting it slightly to our needs.
Yep.
But indeed,
Okay, that's very cool. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I think in that case, it's best if we carry on with our next speaker, who is Hong Shihan, who will be giving us a talk on verification of quantum depth, classical verification of quantum depth.
Can you see the
All right,
slide?
yeah, the slides seem to be working. So yes, you can go ahead and begin.
Okay, so yeah, so thanks for giving me the chance to speak in the conference. So today I'm going to talk about our work on classical verification of quantum depth. This is a joint work with Naihui Jia, who is a professor at Rice University. So we've posted our paper on arXiv. This is a link to it. So in this talk, I'm going to briefly introduce protocols that distinguishes hybrid schemes of different quantum depth. And then I'll go through our contributions, including protocols that certifying quantum depth. So yeah, before we dive into details, I'm going to start with formally what we mean by computational models with limited quantum depth. So this talk will consider hybrid schemes, which are basically interleaving classical computations and shallow quantum circuits of total depth d. So without rules of generality, there are two variants. One is called classical quantum scheme, and the other is called quantum classical scheme, which are basically different ways of interleaving an arbitrary classical computation with shallow quantum circuit. But just to be careful that in a QC scheme, the total quantum depth combining these unitaries is should be the total quantum depth should be no more than d.
Shihan, can you hear us?
Yeah, it seems we might be having some connection difficulties. We could wait a few minutes and see.
Can you hear me?
Okay, it seems to be better. Try again.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So, and yeah, we can define complexity classes BPP to BQNC and BQNC to BPP to include the problems solvable using hybrid schemes, which are basically classical quantum schemes and quantum classical schemes. And then we say a protocol is a classical verification of quantum depth if it comes with two depth parameters d prime and d, such that the following conditions hold. The first condition is called completeness, which says that there exists a depth d prime hybrid scheme such that the verifier accepts at the end of the protocol. And then the other property is called soundness, which says that the verifier should reject every depth d scheme. Okay. So in this talk, I'm going to present our results on certifying quantum depth classically. So this talk consists of three parts. First, we give improved separation between a depth d and a depth d plus constant hybrid scheme relative to an efficient oracle. So So normally for oracle separation, we don't really need the oracle to be efficiently computable, but it turns out it would be useful for us to give a two-player protocol that certifies a quantum depth, which is going to be the second part of our work. And then finally, I'll go through a single device verification that certifies QC schemes. So first of all, we give improve the oracle separation, showing that there exists an oracle relative to which D plus constant hybrid schemes is strictly more powerful than depth D hybrid schemes in aforementioned two different settings. So the idea is the following: we ask a query algorithm to solve Simon's function, but instead of given access to a regular Simon's problem, but instead of given access to a regular Simon's function, it's given access to an in place.
Yeah, we might have to wait a few seconds again.
So we hope Shihan will get back soon. Or is he offline now? Wait.
Not as far as we can see, but yeah, we still have a little bit of time, so we could wait a little longer and see if the connection stabilizes.
Right.
Oh dear. Okay, that's probably a no.
Maybe he's trying to log in again.
Yes. Yeah, we can wait a little longer.
Let us try to inform him. Okay, he's no longer online. But okay, he's back. Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. Yeah. So we lost you around the time when you were talking about the in-place permutation.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So previously, Naihui and collaborators shows a separation that uses a similar idea. But the gap actually depends on the one of the parameters here. So like our improvement should separates like the text parameters that are constant that differs by a constant. So then we use the above query algorithm to give two-player protocols. So the idea is following. It's very simple, which is ask the right. So the two-player protocol certify quantum depth in the following setting. So PA is a target machine whose quantum depth is something that we want to certify. And then to achieve purely classical verification, we add another player called PO. To help us to achieve purely classical verification. So the idea is that we can have PO and PA simulate the above query algorithm. If PA has sufficiently large quantum depth, then they can successfully simulate a query algorithm and find the hidden shift. If the PO doesn't have sufficient large quantum depth, PA doesn't have sufficient large quantum depth, then it will be rejected with high probability. So for this protocol to work, we need PO, and in particular, PO performs the oracle query honestly. To make sure this happens, we integrate verification of quantum computation protocols and robust self-testing protocols by Broadbent and by Cordangelo, Jeffrey, Guido, and Liddick. That allows us to certify the player follows the protocol honestly. So in the last part, we give a single device verification protocol that uses that is based on the harness assumption, quantum harness of learning with errors. So the idea is the following: from quantum harness.
Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, we might have to do a faster version of this instead, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Maybe I'll skip this part. So yeah, so we give a protocol relative from learning with errors, and for completeness to present the D prime QC scheme. For soundness, we show that
Okay.
large quantum depth, even with good probability, it can break the adaptive particle property. So yeah, so I include a few open questions. Yes.
All right, thank you very much. And yes, let's see. Some of, well, the online questions seem to be regarding other topics. Anyone in the, okay, you just closed the window, okay. Anyone in the live audience who wants to ask a question? Just a quick one.
Oh, yes, we do have one question here.
But yeah, we'll have to keep it short.
Oh, yeah, so kind of a stupid question. Can you comment on the second slide? What's the difference between those two quantum classical hybrid methods?
Right. So in a classical quantum hybrid scheme, we can view like a classical computer as a host, querying a shallow circuit. In a quantum classical scheme, we can see like we can decompose the circuit into like D layers of single depth one circuits, and then each circuit is a host, like looks like a host querying an arbitrary classical BPP machine, for example.
You are just
yeah.
in order a little bit because you are both interleaving classical and quantum computation. What's the difference between the two?
Right. So I think you're right. So this is just like formal ways of defining hybrid models, and right. So in a classical quantum scheme, in each layer, the quantum states must be measured entirely, so the coherence will be destroyed. In a quantum classical scheme, the part of the coherence can stay throughout the computation. So I think that's a major difference.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much. And okay, for our next speaker, we have Prabhanjan Anav, who will be presenting us on PRFS constructions.
Can you see my slides, by the way?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about pseudo-random function-like states, new definitions and constructions, and this is joint work with Aditya, Lowen, and Henry. So what is PRS? PRS is a cryptographic object that is associated with two properties. The first property is the efficient generation property, which says that there exists a polynomial-sized quantum circuit that takes as input a binary string and it outputs a quantum state. And the second property is the pseudo-randomness property, which says that the output distribution of a PRS generator should be computationally indistinguishable from a hard random state. And this should be true even if the adversary is given multiple copies of the state. So why is PRS useful? It was shown that PRS has applications in proving some negative results in quantum gravity and quantum machine learning. So what do we know about constructing PRS? So we know how to construct PRS from one-way functions. This was a work by Ji, Liu, and Song, and this was subsequently improved in a couple of works by Brakarsky and Shmueli. So one thing that was sort of left open from these works is that it wasn't even clear whether one-way functions was necessary to construct PRS. So the first question we tackle is, for which parameters of output length can we hope to achieve PRS with information theoretic security? Okay. So in a in a work that was posted last year, we observed that PRS is, it's sort of hard to work with if you want to use PRS to come up with cryptographic applications. And so we came up with a new notion called pseudorandom function-like states. So if you're familiar with classical pseudorandom functions, so this is a quantum analog of pseudorandom functions. So just like PRS, it has efficient generation and security properties, except that in the efficient generation property, you have this generator, which is again a polynomial-sized quantum circuit. In addition to taking a key k as input, it also takes as input another string x, and it outputs a string. It outputs a quantum state that is parameterized by x. Right. So PRS, given a key, you can only generate one pseudorandom state, whereas here, using the same key k, you can generate multiple pseudorandom states. So in terms of security, what we want is that even if I give you multiple PRFS evaluations on many inputs, let's say x1 through xq, then they should be computationally indistinguishable from IID random states. And again, this should hold even if I give you multiple copies of the state. Okay, so this is the definition of PRFS. Oops. So if you observe the security definition carefully, you'll notice that the inputs x1 through xq is sort of like fixed ahead of time. So this security definition is referred to as selective security. So for many applications, especially in cryptography, selective security is not a very useful notion to consider. So the second question we tackle is to come up with stronger security notions that will be useful for cryptography. So far, we have just been talking about definitions of PRS and its variants. So what about applications? So it was shown in a couple of works last year that PRS is useful for building some cryptographic primitives that were previously known to be implied by just one-way functions. So PRS is, there are oracle separations between PRS and one-way functions. So it is interesting to come up with constructions just from PRS. So the drawback of these constructions was that they used quantum communication, right? So this made these constructions incompatible with the constructions from one-way functions, because these constructions just use classical communication. So in general, classical communication is more desirable. So we ask the question whether we can build commitments and encryption with just classical communication. And this is the third question that we tackle. Okay, so what are our results? So with regards to the first question, we show that if you have a PRS with output length larger than logarithmic in the key length, which is security parameter here, then this necessarily would require computational assumptions. And this is sort of tight because recursion engineering showed that there exists an information theoretically secure PRS with output length c times logarithmic in the security parameter for some constant c less than 1. And as a side result, we also come up with a simpler proof of PRS from one-way functions. Okay, so going back to the second question, we come up with a new security definition that we call adaptive security. In this definition, not only do we allow the adversary to choose x1 through xq adaptively, but we also allow the adversary to make superposition queries. So it can query on superposition over all possible PRFS inputs. And this sort of security definition is useful for getting newer applications that we didn't know how to achieve just from selective security. So we construct adaptive PRFS from post-quantum one-way functions. And finally, we show that many of the cryptographic applications from PRS that was constructed in the previous works, you can get those applications just with classical communication. So in particular, what we show is that we can get commitments from PRFS with classical communication, and similarly, you can do something similar for encryption from PRFS as well. So in the remaining 1 minute I have, I'm just going to have a couple of slides about the solutions for question 1 and question 3. So let me start with the first, the solution for question 1. So here we show that if PRS has output length larger than logarithmic in the security parameter, then there exists an unbounded adversary that given enough number of copies of a state can distinguish whether the state is a PRS state or a Haar random state. And the main idea is very simple. So what we do is we look at T-copy PRS states and look at the subspace spanned by them. And we look at T-copy Haar random states and look at the subspace spanned by them. And we observe that if T is lambda plus 1, then there is a gap in the dimensions of these two subspaces. And using this fact, we come up with a distinguisher that distinguishes T-copy PRS states versus T-copy Haar random states. So this was just about the feasibility result. So in terms of constructions, cryptographic applications, we show how to construct bit commitments with just classical communication. So our starting point is construction from the previous year, which was a 3-message protocol where the first and the third message was classical and the second message was quantum. Right. So what we do is we sort of dequantize the communication in this protocol. So the idea to dequantize is very simple. So we just use state tomography. So instead of Alice sending the quantum state, what it does is Alice performs tomography on this quantum state and sends the classical description of the state to Bob. And since we are only working with log qubit states, Alice is still a quantum polynomial time algorithm. And then we do a slightly different analysis to show that this commitment protocol still satisfies heading and binding properties. And that's it.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry for the delayed start to your talk. So yeah, I mean, if you have anything else you want to mention a bit more, sure. Yeah, and also in the meantime, if there's anyone who wants to ask a question from the audience.
Yes, we do have a question on site again.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's me again. And so you are talking about information theoretical PRS. Is that just T design?
No, in T design, you're sort of like fixing T ahead of time, and even the generator can depend on T. In this case, when we talk about security, the adversary can choose the number of copies it can get.
Wait, but don't you just have T that's bigger than whatever numbers or copies the adversary can choose?
Right, in T design, you're sort of fixing the number of copies the adversary can get, but in PRS, there is no such restriction. The adversary can get as many copies of the state as it wants.
And that's information theoretically secure, you are saying?
Yes. So for some parameters, you can get information theoretically secure PRS.
Even if the adversary get infinite copy, is information theoretically secure? So.
If it can get any number of copies of the state, yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I had a slightly similar. You need some kind of scaling comparison, right? Because if you have any sort of discrete distribution in the limit, asymptotically, it will become distinguishable from truly Haar random.
Right, right. So when I said any number of copies, any polynomial number of copies.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah. Yeah, of course, if you can get exponential number of copies, then you can distinguish. So the adversary itself is computationally unbounded, but it can only get like polynomial number of copies of the state. Does it answer your question?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Although, yeah, I mean, the session for today is the final slot. So in case anyone has some leftover questions, we can spend a few minutes if you want to wait a bit for lunch. So anyone else from the audience? Oh, did something show up? Okay. Right, okay. So in the online Q&A, there's a question regarding, is the tomography process efficient for the bit commitment protocol you constructed?
Yes, so we use a poly-based tomography procedure, but since we're only working with logarithmically many qubits, so it will end up with being like polynomial time computable.
Prabhanjan, so you mentioned that there's an oracle separation between this and one-way functions. but
Yeah.
currently we still don't know how to build kind of cryptographic schemes that we can't build from one-way functions, right? Do you think that it's reasonable that you could come up with like a cryptographic primitive that you can only build this way, but not with one-way functions?
Oh, that's a good question. We don't know. Like one such example is like public key encryption. We don't know how to build public key encryption from our functions. It would be interesting to see if we can build public encryption from
That would
key.
also be my first attempt. Yeah, try public key crypto. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really cool idea. Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay. But yeah, okay. In that case, I think let's wrap up the session for today. So round of applause for our speakers. And so thank you everyone for attending, and thanks to the speakers for taking the time to give the presentations.
All right, thank you, Ernest, for moderating this session, and thank you all of our speakers again. And I believe there are some questions left in the chat box, and maybe the speakers can answer the question in chat box accordingly during the break. Thank you so much again. And now we'll take a break. Please come back for our next session at 3 p.m. Taipei time. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Well, the Taipei morning. Thank you. And for our audience on site, it's now lunch break. So it's the same. Our lunch is set on the 4th floor at the catering area. So please